HOA Karen blocks. My pool freezes. When Navy SEALs host rescue training. A lone creek from the old oak gate at Sycamore Hills sets the stage for one of the most explosive neighborhood conflicts you could ever imagine. In a seemingly ordinary cul-de-sac, an unassuming backyard pool becomes ground zero for an unforgettable clash between a meddling HOA enforcer labeled by neighbors as Karen and a small group of United States Navy SEALs. At first glance, everything appears quiet. But beneath the pastel-hued suburban veneer lurks a storm of intrigue, secrets, and shocking betrayals waiting to be unleashed. You'll soon witness how everyday life can spiral into chaos when unexpected guests arrive, culminating in a most dramatic showdown. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. My name is Marcus Crane, and I've lived in Sycamore Hills, a neatly manicured neighborhood off the outskirts of San Diego, for about 5 years. My wife, Taylor, and I purchased our house here because we love the crisp suburban feel with perfect sidewalks for walking our German Shepherd, Hank. We didn't anticipate any trouble, let alone anything involving the dreaded homeowners association. You see, our HOA is legendarily picky. They issue citations for everything from mailbox paint chips to the color of your lawn chairs. However, among all the HOA's self-proclaimed guardians, there's one who stands above the rest. Miss S. Karen Patterson. She's tall, always impeccably dressed in pastel-colored pantsuits, and sports an unwavering scowl. She circulates official warning letters with the same intensity and frequency as a teacher's red pen across failing papers. One bright Monday morning, I was cleaning my pool deck when I spotted Karen striding purposefully across the street. Her step was unusually determined, even for her. She approached my fence with a bundle of papers clutched in her arms. I could feel the tension in the air as she scanned my yard, glaring at the water shimmering under the California sun. She had that look, the one that says, "I'm about to ruin your day." I approached cautiously, shoulders tensing in anticipation. Karen, hardly waiting for me to speak, launched into a lecture about my unauthorized gatherings and some new HOA policy. According to her, we had to limit pool use to immediate family members only. No large parties, no unscheduled guests, and certainly no training exercises. I had no idea what she was talking about. Who conducts training exercises in a backyard pool? I politely informed her that Taylor and I rarely even have visitors, so any claims of mass gatherings were wildly off base. But she wasn't finished. In her self-important tone, she rattled off a list of our alleged violations: water usage above the recommended limit, fence paint that wasn't up to code, and a so-called excessive noise disturbance last Saturday night. I could only blink in disbelief. We had been home quietly watching Netflix. After that, I decided to end the conversation, but not before she thrust a notice into my hand, instructing me to rectify any further infractions or face consequences. She then pivoted sharply on her heel, head held high, and marched back down the sidewalk. A few days later, as I was performing my morning routine, coffee in hand, letting Hank do his business on the lawn, I saw something that piqued my curiosity: a gray SUV with tinted windows creeping by our street. It paused near my driveway, the engine humming low. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a face. I recognized my old friend from high school, Lieutenant Commander Kyle Manning. He had joined the Navy right after college and carved out an impressive career as a SEAL. "Marcus," he called out, a grin forming under his dark sunglasses. Before I could respond, he hopped out of the vehicle, followed by 3 other men I didn't immediately recognize. With matching purposeful strides and the same close-cropped hair, they looked like a formidable team. Kyle explained they were in town for a short break between missions and were scouting a location for some specialized training, specifically rescue drills. My confusion must have been obvious because Kyle quickly clarified, the official training facilities are all booked up. We're trying to find a private spot to practice a few water rescue scenarios. Something like your pool might work in a pinch. Could we borrow it for a few hours? I was honored, flattered even. It wasn't every day that highly skilled U.S. Navy SEALs needed my humble backyard oasis for a training drill. I invited them in, letting them assess the pool size and the surrounding environment. They concluded that while it wasn't perfect, it could serve as a good place for close-quarter rescue simulations. I had one immediate concern, the HOA. Specifically, Karen. Hosting anything that looked remotely like an official event was guaranteed to set her off. But a wave of pride swelled in me. My friend was protecting our country. The least I could do was lend him the use of our pool. Besides, how bad could it get? The following Saturday, Kyle and his team arrived just before dawn. Each man was carrying an assortment of gear flotation devices, weighted dummies, ropes, and rescue boards. The plan was to run a series of scenarios involving unconscious swimmers, distressed individuals, and nighttime water extraction drills. They even brought specialized underwater cameras to review their techniques later. I kept an eye on the clock, certain the sight of 4 men in military gear might trigger our HOA watchers. Sure enough, by mid-morning, a figure appeared at the edge of my property. A pair of beady eyes narrowed behind heavily tinted sunglasses. Karen. She stood, arms folded across her chest, glaring at the men flipping quietly into the water. I braced myself for some shrill outburst, but, surprisingly, she merely observed. Then she pulled out her phone and appeared to film the entire thing. For a while, it was peaceful enough. The SEALs were training without making much noise, although Hank barked at the occasional splash or grunt. Karen, fixated on them, didn't storm onto my property. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would go away. But as the men ramped up their drills, adding more dynamic maneuvers and minor simulated explosions in the water, they used specialized water flash simulators, nothing lethal, but visually startling. Karen finally snapped. She stomped toward my gate, rattling it with enough force to startle Hank into a frenzy of barking. I rushed over. Karen demanded I stop the commotion immediately. She insisted that these strangers not only violate the HOA's policy on unapproved guests, but also posed a threat to our community's safety. The men in the pool paused their drill, wearing expressions that toggled between confusion and amusement. Kyle calmly tried to reason with her. "Ma'am, we're part of a specialized Navy team. We're not here to cause any trouble, just to practice water rescues. We'll clean up and be out of here in a few hours." However, Karen wasn't having it. She spat words laced with agitation. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. This is a private neighborhood with rules, and you're breaking them." She threatened to call the HOA board, the police, and even the local news if they didn't stop. The situation was teetering on the brink of confrontation, and I thought Kyle might just pack up and leave to avoid drama. But then Karen did something utterly bizarre. In an act that stunned everyone, Karen snatched a rescue dummy from the men's gear and tossed it out of my yard, shrieking, "No official training, no equipment." She hurled it so forcefully, it skidded across the sidewalk, startling a passing jogger. The SEALs stared in disbelief. These were highly trained professionals, used to intense environments, but having a furious neighbor woman fling their gear was definitely a novelty. In a low voice, Kyle reminded Karen she was trespassing on private property. For a split second, I saw her face change. She realized she was the one illegally on my property. Then, defiance flaring, she retreated to her yard but continued shouting from behind the fence. The day ended on a tense note. The SEALs cut their session short out of respect for our neighborly peace, but I could tell Kyle was disappointed. He had truly hoped to get in a few more runs. As they packed their gear, Karen hovered at the property line, phone in hand, presumably capturing evidence. The following morning, I woke to a flurry of text messages from neighbors. Several had received an email from the HOA board indicating that unauthorized military drills had occurred at my address, supposedly endangering the local residents. The email also warned of pending disciplinary actions. My phone kept buzzing. People were concerned, confused, and curious. I scanned through messages, noticing a mixture of annoyance and genuine worry. The last text in the chain was from an unknown number. "You will pay for this, K." I felt a pang of anxiety. Karen was clearly out for blood. I worried that my beloved home, my safe haven, would turn into a legal battleground. Yet I wasn't ready to back down. If letting the SEALs train here could help them in real missions, saving lives, then some petty HOA rules didn't seem like much in comparison. Besides, I was certain there was nothing in the HOA regulations about disallowing a few friends from using a pool. I decided to call an emergency meeting with the HOA board, wanting to get to the bottom of these allegations. The next evening, I found myself in the cramped meeting room at the Sycamore Hills Community Center. A row of stern faces glared at me from behind a folding table. Karen sat off to one side, arms crossed, wearing that self-satisfied grin that made my blood boil. Chairman Hildebrand called the meeting to order. Within minutes, Karen launched into her tirade. She accused me of harboring military-grade explosives, of orchestrating public disturbances, and even suggested that the SEALs' presence might be a front for some kind of illegal operation. It was ludicrous, but the board members seemed alarmed by her passionate storytelling. I fought back calmly, explaining that these men were official members of the U.S. Navy, employing standard training devices that were neither lethal nor dangerous to the community. I reminded them that it was my private property, and I was free to allow guests to use my pool. Just when I thought I might turn the tide of opinion, Karen dropped a new bombshell. She claimed to have discovered suspicious items in my trash, a blatant lie, and implied that I was storing hazardous materials. Outraged, I demanded evidence. Of course, she had none. But her insinuations left a poisonous stain of doubt on the board's collective psyche. Instead of dismissing her claims outright, they decided to conduct an official investigation. That was the first sign that things were spiraling out of control. Over the next week, I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Board members took photos of my property every other day. HOA compliance officers left new citations in my mailbox, one for clutter visible in the backyard, another for improper fence maintenance, and yet another for loud dog barking, even though I had only 3 minor citations in 5 years. Now they were stacking up to the point I risked serious fines. In the midst of this chaos, the Navy SEALs still needed a location for their rescue training. Kyle called me up and asked if I was willing to let them try again. Despite the tension, I agreed. I felt it was the right thing to do, morally if not politically. We arranged a late-night session, hoping to avoid drama by practicing under cover of darkness. That night, around midnight, my backyard was once again filled with the muted sounds of water splashing, quiet commands, and the occasional breathless pant as the SEALs enacted rescue scenarios. My heart raced every time a shadow moved by the fence, expecting Karen to appear. For an hour, everything went smoothly, until Hank let out a low growl. I saw a faint light flicker from across the fence. Someone was there, filming. A rustling noise interrupted the silence. Then, a loud metallic clang echoed through the night. The men froze, scanning the perimeter. Suddenly, Karen's shrill voice rang out, but it sounded oddly strained. Peering over the fence, we saw her foot caught in a coil of rope she'd tried to steal from the top of the fence. She must have been attempting to gather more evidence or sabotage the training gear. In the process, she lost her balance and tumbled forward, hooking her ankle in the rope that dangled from the fence post. There she dangled precariously, head down, phone skittering across the grass. Without hesitation, Kyle and his men sprang into action. Despite her endless harassment, they treated her like any distressed individual. Two of them vaulted over the fence in fluid movements and carefully lifted her back to the ground. She stumbled, clearly rattled. Instead of expressing gratitude, she spewed indignation, accusing them of attacking her. It didn't matter that her phone's camera likely captured her own wrongdoing. The men simply sighed and packed up their gear, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. The next day, Karen filed a formal police complaint claiming assault by the men and criminal negligence on my part for hosting them. I received a visit from Officer Stephanie Moore of the San Diego Police Department. I recognized her as we'd met once before at a local charity event. She was direct but polite, asking about the incident and verifying the men's credentials. I explained everything, showed text messages proving their legitimate status as active duty Navy, and offered Kyle's contact information. Officer Moore seemed skeptical of Karen's version of events, particularly because Karen's story kept shifting. Initially, she claimed they physically harmed her, then suggested they locked her foot in a rope trap. None of it matched the evidence. After a thorough check, Officer Moore left, quietly muttering that the police department would not be pursuing any charges, much to Karen's dismay. But Karen was far from finished. She doubled down on her efforts to get me evicted from the neighborhood. She plastered printed flyers on community bulletin boards, painting me as an irresponsible homeowner. She claimed I was importing militant outsiders who endangered the pristine environment of Sycamore Hills. The flyers even included doctored images, making it look like the men were brandishing lethal firearms around my yard. Concerned neighbors started avoiding me. One older couple across the street halted their friendly greetings. Even the mail carrier gave me odd looks. Tensions rose further when Karen convinced the HOA board to schedule a special hearing. It was rumored they intended to impose a massive fine on me, possibly even foreclose on my property if I didn't comply. I felt cornered, anxious, and angry. I was about to contact a lawyer when Kyle reached out with a twist of fate. He needed one more weekend to finish their rescue training, and the official base pool was unexpectedly closed for repairs. He asked if I could help just once more, guaranteeing they'd be respectful and quiet. In a moment of defiance and solidarity, I agreed. If Karen wanted to escalate, I would stand my ground, but I also hoped for a resolution soon. The next Saturday morning, Kyle arrived with an official letter from the Navy verifying their training was legitimate, completely legal, and posed no threat to civilians. He suggested we give a copy of the letter to any concerned neighbor. I pinned it to the notice board on my gate, hoping it would stave off new confrontations. Everything was going smoothly until mid-afternoon, when a call came in over Kyle's radio. It was from the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, confirming a last-minute official demonstration that was to take place the following day. The rest of Kyle's team rushed to the base, leaving Kyle behind to secure any leftover gear. We were chatting in the backyard when we heard a blood-curdling scream from across the street. Neighbors started running out of their houses, looking toward Karen's home. Thick, gray smoke billowed from an upstairs window. Through the haze, we could see frantic silhouettes inside. It was Karen's teenage granddaughter, Maya, waving from the second-floor window. She seemed trapped by flames licking at the curtains. In an instant, Kyle sprinted toward the burning house, ignoring the blistering heat. I followed behind him, though my heart pounded with fear. The front door was locked, so Kyle slammed his shoulder against it until it splintered open. Inside was a thick wall of smoke, stinging our eyes and lungs. Crouching low, we navigated the hallway, calling out for Maya or Karen. We found Maya in the upstairs hallway, disoriented and coughing. Kyle grabbed her under the arms, guiding her down the stairs. My eyes darted around for Karen. We found her collapsed near the kitchen, unconscious from smoke inhalation. Without hesitation, Kyle scooped her up, carrying her out. The moment we stepped back onto the lawn, a wave of relief spread through the gathered onlookers. It took a few more minutes for the fire department to arrive, but we'd managed to get both Karen and Maya out safely. Firefighters quickly doused the flames, preventing extensive damage. An ambulance arrived to administer oxygen. Karen, her eyes red and teary, blinked in confusion as she came to. She stared at Kyle, her face reflecting a swirl of disbelief, gratitude, and lingering resentment. In the chaos, I noticed several neighbors had formed a small crowd across the street. Some stared at Karen, who was now receiving urgent care in the back of an ambulance. The entire scene felt surreal. Just hours prior, she was ready to wage a vendetta against Kyle and me. Now she was in his debt, whether she admitted it or not. Over the following days, word spread that Kyle had saved Karen's life. Neighbors who once looked at me suspiciously began thanking us. Some even brought homemade meals as tokens of appreciation. The hostility around my pool situation thawed considerably. But the biggest change occurred when Karen finally returned home from the hospital, hobbling with a slight limp but otherwise intact. A hush fell over the cul-de-sac when her SUV pulled up. She emerged, leaning on Maya's arm. A handful of neighbors offered supportive greetings, but she brushed them off, scanning until she found me standing in my driveway with Hank. Cautiously, I raised a hand in greeting. She met my gaze, swallowed hard, and shockingly walked over. "Marcus," she began, her voice quivering. I'm sorry." For a moment, I thought the sky would fall. This was Karen Patterson, the fiercest enforcer of the HOA, the most belligerent neighbor I'd ever encountered. Yet here she was, apologizing. The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable. She cleared her throat, continuing, "I know I've been difficult, but I owe you and your friend Kyle, was it? A debt I can't repay." I was stunned into silence. Karen reached into her coat pocket and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It was one of the infamous violation notices she'd mailed out. In a shaky voice, she said, "I've asked the board to rescind every penalty, every citation against you." I told them I lied, or at least exaggerated. I also recommended we allow reasonable gatherings for the sake of your friend's training. My mouth hung open in disbelief, but Karen wasn't finished. She confessed that she was once engaged to a Marine who never returned from overseas. Since then, she'd carried a strange sense of resentment and fear around anything related to the military. She couldn't explain it rationally, but seeing the uniforms, hearing the training drills, it triggered old wounds she'd tried to bury. She recognized that her actions had been irrational, even cruel, and it took being saved by a Navy SEAL to realize just how misplaced her anger was. From that point on, the transformation was remarkable. Karen, who once roamed the neighborhood with her phone camera poised, now volunteered to keep an eye out for suspicious strangers in a more cooperative way. She reined in her scrutiny, targeting genuine issues like vandalism or illegal dumping rather than petty flowerbed disputes. Neighbors felt a collective sigh of relief. And as for me, I was just happy to see an end to the chaos that had enveloped our lives. But the most satisfying twist came at the next HOA board meeting. The special hearing was still on the agenda, but instead of a disciplinary showdown, the board announced they were dropping all fines and citations against me. To top it off, they introduced a new policy, community support for public servants. This policy allowed residents to host members of the armed forces and other emergency personnel for reasonable short-term activities, provided safety measures were in place. During the meeting, Karen stepped forward. She read a brief statement in which she publicly thanked Kyle and admitted she had overstepped her bounds. The hush in the room was electric. For years, residents had feared Karen's wrath, but now they witnessed a woman humbled by a near-death experience and saved by the very people she'd antagonized. In a final act of karmic retribution, the board recognized me with a small honor, praising our quick thinking in saving Karen and Maya from the fire. They even mentioned awarding an honorary certificate to Kyle, though he joked that he'd rather keep a low profile. I couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in Karen's hands as she applauded along with everyone else. For once, her expression was not that of anger or dominance, but of genuine respect. A few days later, Kyle dropped by to collect some gear he'd left behind. As we chatted, Karen emerged from her house, a shy smile on her face. She offered him a heartfelt thank you card and a plate of homemade cookies. "I know it's small," she said softly, "but I hope you'll accept." Kyle, ever gracious, smiled and shook her hand. That day, I realized that some people's harshest behaviors stem from deep pain they carry inside, and sometimes it takes an extraordinary event to crack that armor. Karen might never become my best friend, and she would probably always be a little nosy, but the blind malice she once directed at us had dissolved. In its place stood cautious cooperation, and maybe, just maybe, the smallest glimmer of a supportive neighbor. Yet the most surprising part happened a week later. A neighbor chat group was created on Facebook. Karen, once the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, joined it. She posted pictures of local events, shared tips on home improvement, and even started championing philanthropic efforts like Toys for Tots, which the Marines historically manage. She posted how grateful she was for the Point Us military. The transformation was astounding, and from the comments, the entire neighborhood was astonished too. Time passed, and my pool never again drew the ire of the HOA. Occasionally, Kyle and a few of his buddies would come by for a low-key workout in the water. We still maintained respect for the neighborhood's tranquility, but we no longer lived under constant threat of citations and sabotage. One late afternoon, I was skimming the pool when Karen walked over to the fence. My muscles tightened reflexively, memories of past confrontations still fresh. But she simply cleared her throat, looked down, and softly asked if she could come in for a moment. I opened the gate, a swirl of anticipation in my gut. She handed me a small box. Inside was a plaque that read, "In appreciation, Sycamore Hills, for courage and compassion." My throat tightened as I read it. Karen explained that she'd had it made to commemorate how we acted during the fire and to acknowledge the goodwill we'd ultimately extended to the Navy SEALs. The irony was not lost on me. The woman who once campaigned to evict me was now presenting me with a token of gratitude. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused. You didn't deserve any of it." There was a raw vulnerability in her eyes, and for the first time since I'd known her, I felt a genuine kinship. This was a person who had buried trauma, misdirected it at the world, and found healing in the unlikeliest way. The final bit of retribution came in the form of a justice so poetic I almost laughed out loud when I heard about it. It turned out Karen had used HOA funds to print all those defamatory flyers about me. She thought no one would find out, but after a meticulous review by the board treasurer, the misappropriation came to light. Karen, now on a journey of redemption, didn't lie or fight it. She confessed her wrongdoing, paid back the misused funds plus interest, and accepted a formal reprimand. The board allowed her to retain her position only because she owned up to her errors and showed genuine remorse. From then on, life in Sycamore Hills settled into a peaceful rhythm. Neighbors greeted one another without fear of petty retribution. The HOA became slightly more lenient, focusing on real improvements rather than trivial citations. And Karen, once the nightmare of the block, became its curious guardian. She remained vigilant, but her approach evolved into something constructive. If anything was out of place, she would address it politely or discreetly offer help. People might still roll their eyes at her intensity, but it was a far cry from the destructive meddling of old. When I reflect on those tumultuous weeks, I see them as a testament to how life can unravel and then re-knit itself in the most unexpected ways. A backyard pool, a group of Navy SEALs, and a woman with a painful past collided in a swirl of conflict and drama. Yet in the end, it led to a transformation more profound than any of us could have foreseen. Perhaps the biggest lesson was that sometimes the most ordinary places, like a quiet suburban neighborhood, can become the stage for extraordinary stories. Conflicts can escalate into chaos, but they can also force a reckoning that fosters empathy, healing, and a sense of unity. The story of Karen and the Navy SEALs lives on in Sycamore Hills lore, a cautionary tale of how suspicion can destroy communities, but also an uplifting reminder of how compassion can restore them. And that is how my pool, once blocked by a raging HOA Karen, became the setting for a rescue demonstration that ultimately saved her life, healing old wounds and bridging the gap between suspicion and respect. It wasn't a path any of us could have predicted, but then again, the most dramatic twists are often those we never see coming. So there you have it, a peaceful suburb turned battleground, fueled by misunderstandings and buried pain, yet ending in unexpected heroism and community renewal. It's proof that even the most rigid hearts can soften when faced with genuine compassion. If you found this story gripping, leave a like to show your support. And if the twists and turns kept you on the edge of your seat, share this video with your friends and neighbors who knows it might inspire them to extend a hand instead of harboring hostility. Most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you won't miss future stories packed with tension, redemption, and the comforting reminder that hope can flourish in the unlikeliest places. Stay tuned.